flows through, and now all of a sudden we create an emotional dam. No, I don't, I don't want to feel that. Push it back, resist it, stuff it down. And then what happens, like a dam, everything goes underwater. All the electricity in a dam is created down deep in the, underneath. And you don't even know it's there in the unconscious anymore.
My guest today is Dr. Deb Sandella, a pioneer in the mental and emotional health field. Dr. Deb, as her clients call her, discovered the process known as RIM, or regenerating images in memory. And I speak from personal experience when I say that her work is powerful and fast. After working for 20 years as a traditional psychotherapist, Dr. Deb discovered an effective shortcut to emotional healing through a body-centered transformational technique, which frees you of those stuck negative thoughts, feelings, and memories, so you're empowered to live fully. I had a RIM session with Dr. Deb a few years ago that was so impactful. I still think about it and benefit from it today. RIM is truly a revolutionary method to resolve that stuck trauma, shame, grief that won't go away, and help us live just healthier, happier, and far more productive lives. And, it's hard enough to change the world, but if you aren't emotionally healthy, it's a lot more difficult. So I sincerely would appreciate it if you take just a moment and press that subscribe button. Helps me out a lot. And please enjoy this conversation between myself and Dr. Deb Sandella. Hello, Dr. Deb Sandella. How are you?
Hello, Deborah. I'm good. I'm so happy to be here.
I so appreciate you coming on the podcast. You're one of the people that I've been very eager to speak with because I've had such a great personal experience with your work before, and I just feel the great need to share it with the world as broadly as I can. So really, really very much appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
So, I started listening. I read your book long ago, but I listened to it again recently, and I'm so glad that it's on Audible. Or I think it was free, even if I recall. So I don't know
on
why.
Audible could be.
Yeah, so
It
that
could
was
be.
nice. But it's called Goodbye Hurt and Pain. I don't know if there's is there a subtitle?
7 Simple Steps to Health, Love, and Success.
Well, that's right. It is such a great book. And unlike many sort of self-help books, it is so deep and so lodged in science and in your deep experience as a psychotherapist. So why don't we start by you describing like what your background is and then how you switched to sort of developing this RIM technique that is so useful, and we'll talk about it in depth. So.
Okay, sure. So I was a traditional psychotherapist, and my background is a master's in psychiatric nursing and a doctorate in human communication. So it's a different perspective, which I think actually contributed to creating RIM or discover. It's really more of a discovery. So back in 1995, my brother woke me up in the middle of the night because my dad had a cardiac arrest, and he was in ICU. The nurses were calling and saying that his blood pressure wouldn't hold, and they'd given him all the medications they could, and it still wasn't holding. They didn't think he would live through the night, and they wanted us to agree to a no resuscitate.
Oh, before you even got to see him?
Yes, yes.
Wow.
And I had, as I said, I started as a nurse. So I understood all this, but I had this really strange reaction as I really got angry. Like, how can they ask this? They don't even know who he is. I mean, it was this very personal, raw
Visceral.
response. And I said no, which was so out of character, because I understood that. But there was something else that kind of took over. It was almost like I was responding from a very intuitive place. And as I walked away from the phone to go back to bed, I had this spontaneous image or vision, whatever you want to call it, of my dad walking off to the horizon. And there I was yelling at him how I was not ready for him to go and how mad I was that he was leaving. And so then all of a sudden he paused and he turned around and he looked at me. And the first thing, of course, that was really noticeable is he was a feisty Italian, a little feisty Italian guy. And he had this serene look on his face that I'd
Oh,
never seen
wow. Yeah.
before. And he said, okay, okay, babe, I didn't know you felt that way. And it was like all of a sudden, then he disappeared. But it was like all this anger in my body just drained away. And I kind of felt like a noodle. Like, this is just in my mind,
But
isn't
you were
it?
awake. You were fully awake when
I
I
was
mean,
fully
you just
awake.
saw this image. Wow.
Yeah, and it all had a life of its own. There, I mean, this was like totally spontaneous, and so I didn't understand it because it's like, what just happened? And so then when I went back to Kansas the next morning, the nurse said sometime in the middle of the night your dad's blood pressure started holding. And so suddenly all that education and all that psychotherapy, and I was actually at that time I was doing research and teaching at the University of Colorado, and all that
Mm.
seems so unimportant compared to this.
Oh my goodness.
So it's at the course to explore what was this and how can we harvest, how could I harvest it to use intentionally? Because it was spontaneous. I didn't know what it was. I
Yeah.
didn't know how to use it. So that's been over like 30 years ago now.
Well, then what happened with your father? Did he?
He survived. Yes. I'm sorry I didn't finish the epilogue.
Yeah, it's like, come on.
You hanging.
Kind of important.
Exactly. So he survived and lived another 5 years.
Unbelievable.
That and he and my mom said they were some of the most important years of their lives because it was like being given a second chance.
Yes.
And actually I felt that was true for me too, because it was it changed my life. That experience changed my life both personally and professionally.
So, did your father, I'm sure you told him about the experience. Did he have any of that experience or have any
No,
recollection?
yeah,
It
I
was
didn't
something,
tell him because he was unconscious for 3 weeks. They
oh my
maintained him in an
goodness.
unconscious state to
Uh-huh.
allow the brain swelling to go down. And it was I mean, that was a real journey too, because they said, in the beginning he had been without oxygen too long, that they did not think he would come back intact.
Mm.
And so I continued. Now that I had that first experience, it was like, well, let's try this.
You're like,
Exactly.
yeah.
And so I was tuning into his body, imagining just to see, what was there, and just playing around with supporting him with imagery, like particularly to his lungs, of like blue
Really?
sky coming into his lungs. And so anyway, he came back fully intact. And as he was, so I never told him about it, but as he was
Ever in
coming,
his life you didn't tell him?
no.
Why? What was that decision?
It was I totally forgot about it given this lengthy recovery in terms of him not knowing.
You remember now, and it's been how many?
Well, yeah, he has
Yeah.
constant cares now, but
Yeah.
it was also, he was of a generation that I would say it's harder to receive some of these more invisible things that are invisible. We have a hard time with. The mind has a very hard time with. But what happened is
Hmm.
it was like the first day he was coming out of his unconsciousness, of his induced, I guess
Right.
you call it an induced
Coma. Like,
coma.
yeah.
Yeah. And he's coming out of, and he's really hazy. And actually during that time was during the OJ Simpson trial, and it was on TV, and he made comments.
Oh, that was the first thing.
Well, he
Like
just
one of
was
the
like,
first things.
yeah, it was like it had somehow worked its way into his unconscious.
Oh.
And it was so strange. But then he looked at me and he said, somebody, he was in a dreamy state, of course. And he said, somebody's been there watching over me. He goes, was it you?
Wow.
I think it was you.
Oh.
And then he
Oh.
didn't later, I don't think he even remembered saying that, because it was in that
Oh.
state of just coming back to consciousness.
Because he probably had better access to that. information
It
when he
did.
wasn't, yeah, when
Yeah,
his
at that
intellect
point.
wasn't getting in the way.
Exactly. Yeah, where there was no thinking about it. But that, of course, touched my heart. And I didn't say anything, but it
Maybe
touched
that's all
my
you
heart.
needed to know, you know?
Yeah, it
That's
felt like
very,
it. It felt complete to me. I didn't need that to be known by him,
I understand.
you
Yeah, it's
know.
interesting.
It
But so
now
you had,
later later with RIM, I need people to know, but
yes, that is so you had already been a psychotherapist for what, a decade or two by then or more?
oh,
Or,
yeah, over 20 years.
oh, so then what happened? How did you sort of make this transformation?
Oh, wow. Well, what happened, it changed my life so much that I started really exploring the use of imagination or imagery, and
Mm-hmm.
I began to study it. Began to study some techniques that used imagination in ways, and
So that you
uh,
could use it in your practice? Was that why you were
yeah,
doing it?
yes, so that I could
Okay.
use it in my practice. And so I would use those techniques adjunctively in my psychotherapy practice.
Okay.
And then there came a time when my husband and I actually did a personal sabbatical to Australia because
Mm-hmm.
he was changing positions and he wanted to step into a vacuum to figure out what he was going to do next. And so we did this personal sabbatical again, which changed our lives again. And when I came back, so I closed my practice for a year.
Wow.
And so we went to Australia, and it was the most magical time, to be out of our culture, to be out of not work.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of us were working. It was the
Yeah.
first time since I was in sixth grade I didn't have a job. I was a middle
Excuse me.
Midwestern, you got to work to live kind of
Yes, yes,
mentality.
yes. It's very hard to stop
It's
sometimes.
very hard to interrupt that, and which doesn't include the idea of big money for little work. And
Right,
so this
right.
of being in Australia, it totally re something to my brain that this was even possible to
Like a
take this
reboot.
time, reboot.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, it was a reboot. And so when I came home, and I was supposed to start my practice again, and most of the people I'd had in my practice were ready for a send off. They just needed to be kicked out of the nest, and it was a
Oh,
good thing for them. But
from
there
seeing
was
you as a therapist, you mean? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
But there was one woman, because I had started terminating early enough
Mm-hmm.
to really
Yeah.
bring things to a close. But there was one woman who was clearly wasn't ready yet. And so I had transferred her to another therapist. It hadn't really taken. So the day I was supposed to return, that I had told people I would return to my practice, I get a call from her.
Wow.
And so we
Been sitting
talked
on your
on
doorstep.
It felt like that. It did feel like that.
Yeah.
And I could understand why she
Yeah.
felt that way,
Sure.
And so I called her and we talked for 20 minutes. I went to hang up the phone, and I got this voice, this spontaneous voice in my head that said, and it wasn't my voice, but it's like, who said that? One of those kind of voices that I
Hmm.
think of as actually true intuition. And it
Mm-hmm.
said, if you go back to doing what you used to do, you'll get sick.
Wow.
And it was like, what? Who said that? I mean, this was it was just totally, uh, if you believe in those divine revelations, it felt like that. It
Well, it
was,
seems that you're very naturally in tune, you're an intuitive person, and maybe we all are. But you did that experience with your father validate your intuition or this side of you that maybe you hadn't
yeah,
listened to before as much?
I think that's been a lifelong process
Yeah, yeah.
of listening to intuition,
Mm-hmm.
because the problem is that intuition is illogical and invisible.
Right. Like
And
emotion.
yes, just like emotion,
Yeah.
exactly. So it feels very risky to the mind. It feels like, oh, that would be stupid.
Mm-hmm.
The mind says that,
Right.
that would be
Yes.
stupid. Listen to me. The mind,
Right.
we have two minds, and there's actually a two minds theory, that one is the reasoning mind and one is the
Mm-hmm.
intuitive mind, and
Mm-hmm.
they operate separately. They're different. And actually, in RIM, what I have learned is it's all about creating their interconnection in a smooth way, or a whole brain process rather than
Mm-hmm.
right brain, left brain.
Yeah, that's
Um,
I was surprised when you said they're separate, but they are separate. You're just finding ways to make them
right. Operate
in
to
operate together.
intersect, help each other.
Yeah.
Because the way that they're separate is they're in different parts of the brain, and
Physically they are.
physically,
Yeah.
yeah, they're in different areas. And also, the reasoning brain is verbal. The emotional creative part of the brain is nonverbal. And
Okay.
so we have to figure out that
I
communication
see. Yeah.
between the two.
So let's jump into RIM or RIM. I think you just call it RIM now.
I
I
just,
think
yeah,
for so
just for
long I heard it.
short, it's so
Yeah.
easy. But
Yeah,
it
it
is an
is.
acronym.
Yeah. So you over time started to develop this, and maybe let's just jump to the point of what it is. So we can back up and see how you developed it if need
Sure,
be, but
sure.
what is it?
Yeah, I would say it is a verbal way of utilizing it's collaborating with our organic emotional operating system. So I would say what I discovered just by turning my attention in this way and
Mm-hmm.
playing with it, like with people, and I wasn't charging in the beginning, I was just playing,
Uh-huh.
like I would work with
Learning.
friends,
Yeah.
you
I'm sure
know.
they loved it.
Yes, they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
And what I discovered is that we actually have a very resourced emotional operating system organically, but that we are overriding it with thought and thinking. We're trying to control our emotional operating system, but it actually has its own system, the same way our body physical system works
Mm-hmm.
together. It's very similar to the body system. Like there's constant feedback, the same way your body gives you feedback. Am I comfortable? Am I cold? Do I need to walk? Do I need to move? The
Mm-hmm.
same thing with emotions, but because it's invisible and it feels out of control, we're scared of it. So we try to control it.
Do we only try to control our negative emotions because those are the ones we don't like?
Yes,
Because or
we
do we
try to.
also control our happy emotions or joyous emotions or
Well, what happens is we definitely try to control things like anger, rage,
mm-hmm.
jealousy, sadness, grief. They're
Yes.
uncomfortable. So
Right.
our natural, and that makes sense. Our instinct, even as an infant, we're born with three feelings: comfort, discomfort, and curiosity.
Hmm.
So the comfort and the discomfort kind of rule our lives really throughout, but we
Yes.
learn more sophisticated ways to understand that. And sometimes we don't.
Mm.
Sometimes we just respond in a very primitive way to discomfort. But RIM is I would say, a very organic way to respond to discomfort, because we do try to control this. But what happens is when you try to control those, you stop all spontaneity. You
Mm-hmm.
stop spontaneousness of emotion.
So if I feel anger and I've been taught that anger is inappropriate for females to show, then I've stopped or it's not allowed in your household.
Right.
Then you don't show it, and that's when you start getting these blockades.
Yes, exactly. So I think about it as RIM is a system based on interoception, which is
Okay.
all of the way the body cells interact with each other at a
Okay.
very visceral
Oh,
level.
really?
Yes, yeah. So
Okay.
that what happens is the way that interoceptive system works, along with the now, we know about the polyvagal nerve that's anchored in the center of the body,
Mm-hmm.
that's very sensitive to all of this sensory input in a nonverbal way that determines whether we feel safe or not.
Is that the vagus nerve they talk about?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, the vagus nerve. And
Okay.
so all of that is bringing like uh we constantly have emotion flowing through us in each moment
Mm-hmm.
through the body in an interoceptive way. And much of the time it's unconscious. We're not actually conscious about it or of it, but we can become conscious of it if we focus on it. So what happens, I think of it as a river of this emotion that is flowing through the body, like a river that it is supposed to flow through, bring us information and flow on down the river. It expires naturally. But
Uh-huh.
what happens when, let's say, I was taught as a woman, it's not okay to be angry,
Mm-hmm.
then anger comes in. And anger really is an important emotion because it can alert us to potential danger.
Right.
So it flows through, and now all of a sudden we create an emotional dam.
Okay.
No, I don't, I don't want to feel that. Push it
Yeah.
back, resist it, stuff it down. And
Right.
then what happens, like a dam, everything goes underwater. All the electricity in a dam is created down deep in the, underneath. And you don't even know it's there in the unconscious anymore.
Okay.
Does that
So
make sense?
yeah, so that you keep feeling it, but over time I'm thinking, so that might happen at the beginning, but then you have a lifetime of this. So are you is this when you start manifesting or displaying
Symptoms?
illness or
It
panic
can.
attacks or,
Yeah.
other
Or,
physical
mhm,
manifestations?
absolutely
Because one time
anxiety.
wouldn't do that, right? One or
Uh,
10 times might not do that.
Oh, no, yeah. No, that wouldn't create a deep physical problem. But yeah, if it just goes underground and it keeps building greater tension and
Mm-hmm.
it's never dealt with, and
Mm-hmm.
because you now don't even know it's there, but it's
Right.
underneath there, and it could be creating like weight issues, anxiety issues. It could be creating all kinds of fear. It can create
Mm-hmm.
fear, doubt, self-doubt, headaches, stomach aches. Because what happens is when we have a feeling that we're not feeling, it gets turned, the hormones, the stress hormones that are created from that
Mm-hmm.
get turned back on us because they're not being dealt with or expressed
Oh,
or
oh,
processed.
okay. That's interesting. Because
Hmm.
I mean, this is sort of people have had this knowledge for a long time that these things are happening, that you can get sick from emotion, that you can get stuck, or you don't, certainly that you don't fully live an actualized life because of it sometimes, right? So we've known that
Right.
forever. I remember Saturday Night Live skits back in like whenever that started, like the beginning was the 80s or even I don't know, but I
Even
just remember they're
earlier.
like, "You're blocking." I always remember that scene that they were, because my sisters and I laughed about that forever, and we'll say it to each other like, "You're blocking," and it was like a very funny thing. Like, but so we know it's there, but that doesn't help us just to
No,
know
it
that that
doesn't.
happens. So how
Right.
does so you develop this process that gets us in touch with this
Right.
and maybe before you talk about the process, which is just fascinating and enjoyable, which most therapy isn't, I don't think. Um, it's can we? I'd like you to talk a little bit about the cures. I guess I don't want to say cures, but the results that you've gotten from it, because you've seen people who physically overcome illness that you've worked with RIM, right?
Right.
And
Right.
literally that, but that's so tangible. But also people that you've probably lots of people that you've seen overcome emotional just blockage, that maybe didn't become physical yet, but just helps them enjoy life more.
Right. Or physical, and particularly trauma. It's very effective with trauma very quickly, which makes, so we've worked with veterans as well.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I can remember working with a woman who was at in the explosion for the Boston Marathon bombing,
Oh, right.
and she wasn't
Huh.
healing. So she wasn't healing because she had an implosion
Uh,
injury.
okay.
And we can imagine the level of what an implosion imprint on the body would leave of trauma that
Mm-hmm.
is pretty severe. So she had had 125. The most commonly used technique right now is cognitive behavioral therapy, and is about thought. So in comparison, so thought, changing your thoughts so you can create a different feeling, but you have to use willpower to do that. So we start with the raw emotion and work, it takes us to the source in the body, like where that emotion's stored in the body. And then that gets unraveled, which creates different thoughts. So she had had 125 CBT sessions and
What
was
is
still
that?
just,
CBT.
oh, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, okay. Like a regular
Yeah.
traditional therapy, sort
It's
of.
a little bit different than
Okay.
traditional, but it is talking about. It is
Yeah.
all talking about.
Yeah.
And so after 2 RIM sessions, her whole healing trajectory changed. She started being able to receive the healing, which meant she was less reactive. She got triggered less. Because after all those sessions, her body was still just as triggerable, which is very understandable given the degree of
Interesting.
the trauma.
Right. Right.
And so what we did is we went into that experience in the body. And in that experience of what was happening in the body, she actually went back to an earlier memory of trauma
Hmm.
that was not physical, that was emotional, and healed that. It was an earlier on trauma.
That's
And then
interesting.
it made the experience of the bombing, it made that look different because now she was resourced at an earlier age.
So interesting, really, because I feel
Mhm.
like that I can point to my own lived experience of that we don't, like, she might have thought, I think anyone would think that it was the trauma, and it was in large measure the trauma from that
Mhm.
implosion. But had she been fully healed when that happened, it may not have hit her that way.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
right. And we know that trauma is cumulative. We know that people who have had previous trauma are more susceptible to soaking
Yes.
up secondary trauma, like through television, even.
Yes, that's so
Mhm.
interesting. So it really does, and nobody really wants, I don't think, very few people I would imagine want to go back and say, oh my gosh, why do I have to look at myself when I was 3 or 5 or 8 or 10? I'm not, that's no longer relevant in my life. But if it's still feeding the future, the current and future
Right.
issues, it really feels like it needs to be done in order
Well,
to
the
live
way, yeah, I always
healthfully.
say the way we look at it in RIM, at the RIM Institute, is that if you have a memory, an emotional memory
Hmm.
that has not been processed, that was traumatic, or had some kind of negative outcome or negative belief about yourself,
Hmm.
that is still stuck in the body,
Hmm.
it has a charge. And it's like that charge is magnetic to attract future
Oh.
similar experiences.
Hmm.
And
And that's a
so,
physical thing. That's not a
right.
hypothesis. I mean, it physically has a charge that you
Right.
could measure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Interesting.
not you're thinking about it and you're not, it's not a in any way a thought process or
Right.
a linear process. It's totally at the unconscious level.
I think it's very hard for a lot of people to accept, or might be hard for people to accept, people who are very linear thinking, maybe, or more um, cognitive based or something, to accept that this is a way to healing that's fast and doesn't
Mhm.
require you to. You just said something in the book, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to rephrase it properly, but it surprised me because you were saying that, like, talking about, like, if something happens to you, let's say you were abused,
Mhm.
somewhere in your life, and you talk to someone about it,
Mhm.
let's say a friend or a therapist or anyone, that it's helpful because you're connecting with them, you're releasing something. There's always a benefit to that, but
Mhm.
that it's not at the site of where it happened, because it's in
right.
your brain at that point. It's not at the emotional site of where that happened. And for some reason, I could really picture that the way that you phrased it in the book.
Mhm.
Because as we talk about RIM, I think it's one of those things that it's really hard to understand until you experience it. Do you think
Oh,
that's true?
completely. Yes, I think
Yeah.
that's very true because it is a client generated process
Mm-hmm.
so that we are not controlling what happened, what shows up.
At all, right.
Yeah, we're following. But if that's the miraculous part of how we're designed. The mind body connection is so powerful because when we start following two things, sensory body awareness
Mm-hmm.
and also imagination, spontaneous imagination, those two things that we're born with, that everybody has,
Mm-hmm.
really can take us to the root source of what needs to be healed for a profound outcome. And we don't know what that is. The mind does not know because it's hidden in the unconscious. Uh,
And
so,
you've done that. You've done it both ways. You were a therapist for 20
right,
years using talk therapy,
I
and
was.
now you've been doing this for how long? A decade or so?
More than yeah, close to 30 years now. I'm very old.
No, I mean just the RIM, the RIM. You haven't been doing
Yeah,
that.
that's been yeah, I have.
You do look a lot younger. That doesn't seem possible. No. How is that? So you've been doing that for 30 years? I thought that
Yeah.
was
So
relatively
my
new.
career is about close to 50 years now. I'm
Oh,
73.
and more of it's
So,
been spent in RIM.
yes.
And
Yeah.
you
I guess
found so
yeah,
what and you find it
maybe I'm over 50
well,
and
regardless, it's been
20.
a
Yeah,
long time.
maybe it's maybe
Yeah,
the
we
match.
won't quiz you on the numbers. There won't be a quiz later. Um, so, is your experience then that there's a big difference between the outcomes for both of these?
Oh,
Like,
not only the outcomes, it's like effectiveness and efficiency, both, because it
mm-hmm,
doesn't take very long. It
mm-hmm,
doesn't take as many sessions. Like with trauma, maybe I would say an average in REM maybe 3 to 5 sessions. Now, sometimes people will then come back when they have a little reason to come back, like something's happened. So I'm not
yeah,
saying
because you're still
it's
needing to
for
process what
forever.
happens now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Sometimes, yeah.
right. But we are creating new emotional memory
Mm-hmm,
in the mind, in the brain. So we're getting a whole new neural network created. That's what RIM does. It stands for RIM,
oh,
stands for regenerating images in memory. And the
mm-hmm,
memory we're talking about is body memory or emotional memory.
mm-hmm,
And so the only way you can access emotional memory is to be in it again. So as you remember it and you're in it, it opens it up and makes it jiggly or biochemically destabilized.
mm-hmm.
So now it can be changed and things deleted or replaced and resaved. It's kind of like on your face of
Editing
your
it.
cell phone. Yeah,
Yeah, you edit something and then save it in a better way, edited
right.
way. That's a great analogy. You use a lot of good real life analogies to explain how it works. I've noticed in your book, like uh, what's the automatic cleaning oven cleaning?
Right,
Can you
self
explain that?
cleaning
Yeah,
emotional
self cleaning
oven.
oven.
Yeah,
Yeah, because once you have a new way of processing things, you don't have to redo it all the time, right?
right.
but don't most people? So I feel like when I hear that, I have led if I look back to my early childhood till now, a lot of things have happened, not just 3 to 5. Like you say, you go back through 3 to 5 sessions, but I feel like, there's so many things that happen that stuck. Wouldn't you
Well,
have to work through them
yeah,
all?
not all, not all. You need to work through the pivotal ones that were where something got decided, where you made it, you really it
Oh, I'm not
locked in.
safe, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, you got
Yeah.
locked in, or I'm not smart, or there's something wrong with
Uh-huh.
me.
Yeah.
Or I should have something I should have done different here. I caused
Uh-huh.
it.
I
Like
see.
that's something in sexual abuse or
Uh-huh.
abuse in general that
You
can be
deserved it
down
or
at
it
the very
caused it.
bottom, even though the
Yeah.
conscious mind might say something different.
Okay.
At the very bottom, there is a lot of questioning of, should I have done something different? Was this
Yes.
really my fault? And it's too
You're a
bad. I mean,
victim.
we know intellectually, no, of course not. But
Hmm.
it doesn't matter when there's an
The body thinks
emotional,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, the body, as the psychiatrist says, the body keeps the score in his book
Yeah.
about trauma. Um,
Now,
yeah.
people don't want, usually, often I know that people don't want, because I had the same experience. I did not want to go to therapy. I went to what traditional therapy a couple of times, not for too long either time, but I didn't want to because I thought, well, what's in there that I don't know about? Or why would I want to go revisit something that was so unpleasant? And
Right.
so I think one of the really important things, because I've experienced a RIM session with you, and I want to talk about it a little bit, because it was so important. And I have more. And we talked about earlier that I think I might need a few more sessions,
Sure.
um, and it's been a while. But what I was afraid of in traditional therapy, and also what I think someone might be afraid of listening to RIM, especially if they've had very traumatic incidents, whether I
Hmm.
guess to them, anything could be traumatic. It could be what someone from the outside
Right.
might consider major, like a rape or something, or, some other kind of abuse or an implosion. But it could have been a slight thing,
Hmm.
like
It
somebody
can be
just,
a slight thing.
yeah. But still, because you don't know, or because you don't want to re-experience it, are people afraid of going into RIM for that reason?
Yeah, I think that, Freud kind of did that to us. I call it his
Maybe.
fatal flaw because it was wonderful. He discovered the unconscious. That was just so
Mm-hmm.
profound. But then he made it a place of monsters and neurosis. And
Mm.
that
Mm.
really set us on a course to go, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to be a normal person. I don't want to go into the
Uh-huh.
unconscious. And the sad part is the truth that he didn't know yet. It hadn't been discovered yet. And this is part of what I have really gotten so in touch with, and how to connect with it, how to collaborate with it, is that in the same place that the monsters live, there's
Mm-hmm.
also the antidotes. There are
Mm.
the solutions. There are the healings. It's in the same place. So if we don't go there, we can't find them.
But even knowing that, people will still not want to go, just so they
They
won't have to
may,
relive it again, right? And
right.
that, one of the reasons
That's
I
just,
wanted to talk about that is because what surprised me, and I'd never heard of before, was that um, you bring in helpers,
right.
which was a game changer for me.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Can you talk
Well,
about bringing in resources, and then I'll share my own just short experience of
sure,
how
sure.
that helped me.
So what we're doing is we're accessing the emotional memory that's important. And
Hmm.
then in that emotional memory, we're now start um, bringing in emotional safety. And one of the ways we can bring in emotional safety is with we call it a virtual resource. That could be anyone, anything that feels safe,
Hmm.
loving, and powerful. And it's just amazing. Grandparents who have passed show up, pets who have been so close to people
Oh,
show up, even current pets or past
yeah.
pets.
Yes.
And sometimes spiritual figures show up. I mean, it can be anything or anyone. Sometimes it'll be an animal that I can remember one woman was really needing to be in touch with her fierceness. She
Okay.
left herself like she really let herself be exploited,
Hmm.
by others, and was taking care of a lot of people and not
Hmm.
taking care of herself. And her virtual resource was this wolf that looked so fierce, but it was right there beside her, protecting
Wow.
her. But
Wow.
taught her about fierceness. It was just amazing. And it all showed up spontaneously through spontaneous imagination, so that we can have safety to then speak and do what we need to do that we couldn't do then because we were blocked in some way
Mm-hmm.
by somebody else or our own fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't stand up for ourselves. We let ourselves
Right.
be bullied, or, we let ourselves internalize self-doubt that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good enough,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, whatever it is
Yeah.
that's there. Or
That's
one
really,
thing that sometimes gets internalized is, oh yes, my parents love my sister more than me.
oh.
That's one that can be there because we have immature egos that
Yeah.
has an experience and then makes a fact of it,
Mm-hmm. When we're
the
kids, you
knowing
mean?
better.
Yeah.
Yeah, when
Right.
we're
When you
kids. Right,
experience it.
right.
Well, so what the way that happened for me was, and I've thought about this. I don't know how that's been about 3, 4 years, maybe 5,
Probably
maybe more.
more.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been a while, and it's still very vivid. I was only did one session, long session, but still those images have stayed with me since then. And one of them was, and I wasn't going in, and I think this is maybe important too. I can't even remember why I chose to go see you.
Hmm.
I knew that you were doing this work and it's interesting for anybody. So I think in some ways it was just like, well, I'm sure I carry a lot of stuff that needs resolving. I know I do. Because I don't think I went in with a specific agenda of what I needed to resolve. But so it started, I described this in that podcast with Michael the other day. I've started with something that happened with my brother that I needed to, like, I thought I'd been responsible for his having to go away when I truly hadn't. Um, but then I just remembered this scene with my mother. There was this, because when I went to traditional therapy, I really did not ever want to have one negative thought about my mother because I loved her so much. So I didn't see how she could have done anything or any of her actions could have been in any way oppressive to me. Um, and I, and because of that original therapy, when I went through, the reason I didn't like therapy after that is because it kind of left this, like, she just kept pulling out all these things and putting words in my mouth things that I didn't feel. And then I left feeling very raw and with anger toward my mother that was unresolved, that had never even been there before. So when I came in to see you again, I wasn't going to talk about my mother, but I was able to stand and talk to her. And I went back, and I don't remember, there was a color and I'd like to talk
Hmm.
about how you kind of start that out with, I don't know your wording, but with color and feelings. And I remember the skirt, I came up with this color sequence in my body that I felt or could see.
Hmm.
And it turned out to be a skirt that she actually had. And I was like
Hmm.
7 years old, and my sister, I'm the fifth out of six, and my sister was born 7 years after me. And so I was just turned 7. The baby came home, and my mother wasn't paying any attention to me. And it had already been a problem because of other things that have happened in my family with, um, anyway, different things that she hadn't been that available anyway. And so this was kind of the point at which it turned. And I
Hmm.
remember standing there, and you're like, what do you want to tell your mother? And what I wanted to tell her was that I'm here, look at me. And all I could see was her skirt. I couldn't see her face. I couldn't see anything but this skirt. And I said, I can't tell her. And you said, who would make you feel safer? And I'm like, Tommy, this friend of mine, Tom, um, who I trust with everything. And so he's next to me, and I have some confidence to say things that I couldn't say otherwise. But I still couldn't do it because I didn't feel like my mother was protected. So then you're like, I don't want to hurt her feelings, and
Yeah.
I'm only like 6 or 7, and I'm like, I don't want her to feel like she could not take care. So
Sure.
then you say, well, who would she bring in? Who would make your mother feel safe? And I'm like, Jen, her sister Jen is like her best friend. So now I'm supported and my mother's supported, and I can express to her, I need you more. You have a new baby. You're not here for me enough. And it was really good. And I've thought back to that scene a million times since then. And I would never have gotten something like that in traditional therapy, where I actually had the courage to say something that was very necessary thing for me to heal, that. And then
Yeah.
she expressed to me, I love you very much, and I have a new baby, and I'm sorry, and I'll make you. I don't even remember what she said, but it was very
Yeah.
helpful. So that's
Yeah.
really the point that I wanted listeners to hear is that even if it's a scary thing or a thing that you don't know if it might be scary,
Right.
bring in helpers, and they bring in helpers, and really very conducive to healing. Really conducive.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. It is that is one of the main principles in REM is to create a safety
Mm-hmm.
so that there is freedom. There's a feeling of freedom to move and act as you need
Mm-hmm.
to. Because that's what causes us to freeze and not like just move forward freely in our lives in various ways.
Oh, yeah. And I
Hmm.
would think that a lot of people, if we're talking about current situations, like somebody
Hmm.
who's currently in an experience where they need to express their feelings to a boss or to a
Hmm.
mate or a child or anyone, that you don't want to hurt their feelings and that you don't want to hurt the relationship, and therefore you don't say things that would be healing to you to say. So I would think it could be helpful in a situation like that as well.
Right, because what it does is it eliminates, like right now, in terms of reality, we think I have to say it to that person in person to work it through.
Mm-hmm.
And with RIM, you don't. So
Uh,
that sometimes I remember a woman who came in because of the relationship, a couple's relationship issue. And in her session, I don't remember all of the work that she did, but I know that when I followed up with her, she said wasn't having the issue anymore with him.
mm.
Uh,
But she only expressed it to you,
but it
not
was
to
only to
him.
me. Yeah, well, it wasn't even to me, but it was in her session, I
Right.
would
Yeah.
say, because
Yeah.
it's
She's
a
talking
bit
to herself.
more, yeah, it's not like
Personal. Yeah.
conversational. Yeah. So that it's amazing. Or people who have passed on, or people
Mm.
that, like somebody that has had a heartbreak, had a relationship breakup,
Mm-hmm.
and that person's now off with
Yeah.
somebody
I'm
else.
gonna call him up and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can work with those things so we're not held hostage because the other person is unwilling now to be able to heal this, help us heal.
Mm-hmm. Or you're unwilling to even express it anyway. That's my thing.
Exactly.
Is like I really don't like to hurt other people's feelings, so I don't express a lot of things.
Right.
Don't want to make
Yes.
them. So that's really helpful.
Yeah.
You know.
And I was going to say it is also practice so that
Mm,
in it you get practice of how to speak it in a way people can hear it. You also like dissolve like the angst part of it because there's ventilation. That's
oh.
safe. There's safe ventilate, so safe venting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
angst is now dissolved. So
Mm-hmm.
now you can be thoughtful in how you present it, and that starts to, that becomes clear also in during the RIM session as to what is successful to say and what isn't.
So it could be helpful for couples, like you don't do couples counseling, so to speak, like you wouldn't have two people come in and do it together, right? If
I
it were a
have,
relationship.
I
Have
have,
you?
yeah.
That
It's
the
amazing.
relationship was the issue?
Yeah,
That
the
they were
relationship was the issue, but it
huh.
doesn't because it's REM. So the couples have their eyes closed the whole time. I
Yeah.
actually did. The biggest was a
Interesting.
family experience,
Ooh.
family, and everybody had their eyes closed. It was like 2 hours on Zoom,
Oh,
and but I was just so amazed how effective it is
really?
because with your eyes closed you're not projecting in the way that the mind usually does,
Okay.
and blaming in the same way, that there's
Interesting.
much more
Gosh.
access to vulnerability to be able to speak
That's amazing. I can't
what
even
you're
picture that. Yeah.
feeling in a different way. And so what happened, what was so fascinating, so what you do is you get at the stuff that's beneath the surface, beneath
Right.
the thinking,
Okay.
and so the two women ended up like really being very strong and speaking things they had never spoken. And it was parents and adult children, college age
Oh.
children. And
Oh.
so the son and the father ended up both sobbing at different times. And the
Oh.
two women uh, actually shared their strength. at different times. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because that's what was under the surface.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, yeah. The feelings
Really
that were buried were because of gender were opposite.
very interesting. My goodness. So it just shows so much of what's beneath the surface, what we
Totally.
hide. Oh my goodness. I
Yeah.
mean, in the book you've talked a lot about I think it was anger, repressed anger, that you had really seen some remarkable healing, like physical healing things. And I don't remember if you had the healing experience with people that like their heart, because I think you said repressed anger was sometimes more linked to heart heart attack or stroke incidents, right? And then,
Well,
but also, and
yeah.
then also you mentioned autoimmune, so I'm not sure, and then also some recoveries from those things. So can you talk about that whole topic a little bit?
Yeah. So that I think that feelings in general, but the uncomfortable feelings. And so
Mm-hmm.
anger is one of I would say we're most uncomfortable with anger in our
Mm-hmm.
culture. Now, what's really interesting in these times where
Right.
it's all over the place, it's
Yes, which
kind
is
of
interesting. Yes.
unbridled, and so we're getting desensitized to it, which may be a useful thing, but we're actually using it as weapons, right
Yes.
now culturally, which is too bad because that's not a useful thing.
And also
Uh,
much more violence right now, tremendous
Much
violence that
more
hasn't been
violent.
there. So that,
That's
I don't know
right.
where what that has to do with repressed anger, but anyway, or
Well, I think,
anger.
yeah, when our pain, so anger and sadness are two sides of the same coin.
Hmm.
It's just if you deal with the anger, then you dip down into the vulnerability where you
Oh.
can feel sad and hurt.
Oh, so it's a
Um,
blockage.
yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes people, I would say they can flip flop.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's anger's on top and the hurt is underneath. Sometimes it's the
Mm-hmm.
hurts first, the anger's underneath. And I would say in the past that used to be gender oriented,
Mm-hmm.
just because of our enculturation.
Right.
And now it's probably more mixed. I'd say it's
Okay.
maybe not as
Huh.
obviously that now, where
Okay.
women would present with hurt, but dip down into the anger. Men would present with
Mm-hmm.
anger, dip down into
Right.
the hurt.
Right. But as far as the healing part, can you talk about that a little
Right,
bit?
right. So if anger, it's like that, there is actually the native story that unresolved anger is like reaching into the fire of the anger, taking a piece of coal, hot burning
Oh.
coal in your hand and holding it. So all the time you're holding the anger, your body is getting burned,
Hmm.
that you're actually suffering
Mm-hmm.
because it's not a emotion meant to be a state of mind. You're not supposed to be angry the body's not designed to hold anger all the time. And what happens when anger goes underground and so it's constantly there to
Mm-hmm.
be triggered,
Mm-hmm.
we become resentful. And then resentment begins to color everything of how
Okay.
we look at life. And so with REM, because we're just allowing what needs to be worked with to surface,
Mm-hmm.
like we're not saying we're going to work with a specific thing.
Right.
We're going to see what surfaces, what the emotional operating system brings to the surface. Then we're right away, there'll be what is present that is not working, that shows up. And as you heal that situation, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of from whenever that was,
Uh-huh.
then you start going forward in a different way. And then you're more open to heal, to express anger. Because, we're getting desensitized to expressing
But is
anger.
that then helping them physically though? Is I guess what my
Yes, it
question is.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that you're creating a peace at the body level, a state of mind that is peaceful and calm and resilient, so that in life, not everything is peaceful. Not
Right.
everything is good.
I've
Not
noticed.
everything we like. That's just the nature of how life is. So you are constantly going to have
Right.
things that challenge you. But
Hmm.
the resilience, when we talk about resilience, that's really about being able to deal with what
Hmm.
confronts you and
Hmm.
then process it and spring back to your full wholeness as a being, your full healthiness as a being. And so when we do this work, that's what's happening. It happens this one time in a session, let's say, and that starts to be understood, and people start to naturally even start to live in that way more. I don't know if you experienced that. Did that carry on for you to become more resilient related to that issue?
Um, I have to be honest in that and say that I don't remember
Sure,
specifically
sure.
because I definitely have um, progressed from that from whatever from where I was a few years ago, so that I am definitely able to. But I and probably what it did if I look because I hadn't thought about it, but when I think about what it did is it had me change my physical situation and remove myself from a physical situation, which then I felt like I took to be that I did better when I started healing and felt
Yeah.
had more resilience because I wasn't living in that situation anymore. But certainly the rim may be the thing that had because that's about when that happened, like a year or so later. So that
Right.
so yes, I guess it's funny like
Yeah.
because you're not always going to walk out and say, "Oh, my autoimmune disease is healed" or whatever,
No, no,
like that's it's not going to happen that afternoon. But you do, but
no.
there are some things that like grief, like severe grief that you said I can heal within 1 or 2 sessions.
Yeah,
And
well,
yeah,
not maybe not grief. Grief is a
the
process.
stuckness from the yeah,
Yeah,
or the
what we call, yeah, a prolonged grief can
yeah.
unlock, like somebody who, their adult child committed suicide or was murdered like 20 years
Mhm.
earlier, and
Mhm.
then one session really can change everything.
Really.
In a situation like that. But I
Mhm.
would say in a current grieving situation where you've had a loss,
Yeah,
there
you have to
is
work
it's
through
a
that.
process, yeah. So
Sure,
you have
sure.
to go through that. But I think, so I just remembered one particularly outstanding situation. A woman came in. She called saying that she was dying of what is it, fourth stage cancer,
Stage
colon
4, yeah.
cancer,
Uh-huh.
and that so she didn't feel ready to die, and so she wanted to come in to work on that. And I said,
Hmm.
okay. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know, it's like in rim
Mhm.
we're just working with whatever it is that shows up. And so she came in, and after her very first session, her tumor titer, she just happened to be having a test, the titer of the tumors, whatever, how that works, the size
Mm.
decreased after the first session. So that was very
Mm.
encouraging to her. But we were not working on trying to heal her.
Right. No.
It was
Well,
just
you're trying to heal her, but you're trying to heal her emotionally,
yes,
which can lead to the physical
right,
healing.
exactly. Yes.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
she
it's
had,
just
yeah, because she felt she was dying. Her husband, who was a anesthesiologist, had stopped working to take care of her during
oh,
this time. I mean,
yes.
their whole
Yeah.
life was oriented towards her
Right.
dying. They were
Right.
going through her travel list,
Uh-huh.
her final things things she wanted to do before she died. And
Hmm.
so she gave herself to the work fully. I mean, the level of emotion she brought to every session was full out. She played
Hmm.
full out. And after about 4 sessions over around, I think it was 5 months because they were traveling a lot.
Mhm.
So it wasn't like frequent sessions. She
Yeah.
went into remission.
Oh, she did.
Her cancer went into remission.
Ah,
And it was like, I was blown away. It was
yeah.
so powerful to be with her in that journey.
It's just a very powerful process. And one thing we don't have a lot of time. There's two more points I really wanted to get to, and one is the fact that um, I guess it's a two-pronged topic, one that whether you can actually help yourself using RIM.
Hmm.
I don't know
Yeah.
if there's a clear case for that. And then also, are people, when you're dealing with something, let's just say it's a stuck trauma from years ago that's really affecting your life,
Hmm.
is that something that, because you don't need to be a psychotherapist to become a RIM trainer.
Hmm.
So as a traditional thinker of therapy, I would think, is that person, am I safe bringing up some old trauma or something that's really significant with somebody who's not trained, clinically trained, and so forth?
Well, so I would say that, well, let me answer that. I have to remember there are two
There's two
questions here,
parts.
or I'll
Yeah.
get so involved in one and I'll
Sorry.
forget. No, that's okay. So the self RIM, definitely. You can do self RIM. Now, if you have a bigger issue like trauma
Mm-hmm.
or um, a physical condition,
Mm-hmm.
then you probably will get the best result by working with a facilitator, a RIM
Mm-hmm.
facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to. I mean, I have had people tell me they've used the book and were able to heal some sexual abuse. So,
Hmm.
I don't like to make
Depends on the
assumptions about
person.
anything.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that, but at any point, if you feel like you need help,
Mm-hmm.
getting to it, and I think
Right.
particularly with a physical problem, like there's things are pretty deeply unconscious for them
Mm-hmm.
to go
Right.
that underground to show up as a physical
Alone.
illness, that
Yeah.
I would suggest probably that would
Yeah.
be really
Okay.
helpful to work with somebody. Um,
And then the second part was about whether you need to have
oh, right, a
clinically trained
therapist.
person or a
Mhm.
therapist. Yeah.
So I've been a therapist and I am totally about safety.
Mm-hmm.
And when people are trained in RIM to work with trauma, they
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of skills of how to work with trauma in a different
Okay.
way. And to be quite honest, as a therapist, I don't know where, today they probably have more skills.
I
But
haven't
when
done
I
lately.
was trained, it was all just talk about it so that you never get
Right.
down into a flashback.
Okay.
In RIM, if people remember trauma, it's actually an access point to heal that trauma in a much deeper way. And we
Mm-hmm.
know how to do that safely. And it's
Okay.
very different than what I learned as therapy. It's
Okay.
therapeutic, but it is not done as therapy. So the other thing is we do have a very clear um, guide that not to work with people who have serious mental illness unless
Okay.
you are a licensed therapist.
Okay. And there are licensed therapists who also use RIM.
Yes,
So if you really
correct.
wanted to, you could do that. So where do people get help? I mean, are there RIM facilitators?
Hmm.
Well, you say you can do it. So you do it on Zoom as
Right.
well as in person.
Yes, it's
During
very effective on Zoom actually because the client feels very safe in their own space.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like my initial reaction would be I wouldn't like that as much, but on the other hand, yeah, you are in your safe spot already.
Exactly. And so you
Yeah.
feel very free to do whatever you need. Otherwise, if you're like, say, in my office, then you're
Mm-hmm.
on my territory and it
Right.
doesn't feel the same. I've had people do both and decide to do the virtual.
Well, as I told you when we were setting up the podcast, I was in your office when I did it, and I see your office, and it made me like a warm fuzzy feeling. So I know for me that was a really good experience. I kind of
Good.
I'm much more of an in-person person, but you
Yeah.
cannot, now here I am, how many thousands of miles away from you right now. So I would definitely
Right.
do it remotely because
Yes.
everybody's all over the place now physically. So we've got to kind of turn to those kinds of helps. And it's great that we can. It's great that we have access to that. So then what is the best way to go to the RIM Institute like website, which I'll put in the show notes, but is that the
Mhm.
best way to find a
Yes.
facilitator?
Yep, there is. That is. So we have a
Mm.
directory of
Oh,
certified RIM facilitators because there's different levels
hmm.
of training,
Okay.
and those levels are made very clear
Okay.
in the directory. And then each person, each facilitator has its own page of what their philosophy is and how they approach things, and then their
Oh,
contact information,
okay.
so that you can pick and choose.
And that's also where you could learn to become a facilitator if you so chose, is through
Correct.
that same site. So what's it? Can you just say what the website
Oh, yes, it is.
is, and then
It's
I'll put it on there too.
sure. It's REM, RIM
Hmm.
Institute, INSTITUTE.com.
Okay, riminstitute.com. All right.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've just had a therapy session, a good one. Even though we didn't, I feel like I did, just because you have such a lovely way of being.
Oh, thank
And
you. Thank you, Deborah.
you project so much safety just in your persona. So I think, and a lot of times I think that's true with a good therapist too, that you feel
Yes,
like you'd want to be around them for some reason. So
yes,
that's wonderful. So I think this can help people. I just want people to also know that, I mean, this is for anxiety, this is for grief, this is for those kinds of trauma, for all those types of things, but also for growth, right? If you
yes.
want to become a leader and you're not good at leading or something,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's been used as much for that, but just to say that there's a side that if you're not struggling, you can still use it for personal
That's right.
growth.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
there are sometimes people bump up against not feeling like, well, who am I to do this or to be big enough or to
the
step
imposter
into this
syndrome kind
power?
of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kind of like
yeah.
exactly. Yeah. In fact, we have a master student right now doing research with imposter syndrome, using RIM
Mm,
with imposter syndrome with women in tech. And
very
she has
good.
great
That's
results.
great.
Yeah, great results.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the sky is not the limit. There is no limit. So I guess the sky doesn't have one. But hence the saying. But Deb, thank you so much. This has really been helpful, I think, to me, and I think it will be to everybody. And I think you'll be getting a phone call from me soon. So
Well, it's certainly welcome.
part two.
Yes, yes. Well, it's been wonderful to be with you, Deborah. I so appreciate it. It's lovely
All
to be
right.
together again.
Maybe we'll run into each other on the path one of these
Yes.
days. All right. Take care.
You
All right.
too.
Thank you. Bye bye.